This evening, we remember a great yet humble man who in his life was a spiritual guide, a pillar of strength, a source of comfort and wisdom for many. Many of us call him Daddy because that was indeed what he was to us. A great pastor and a mentor. He lived a life of love for all who came into contact with him because of his deep respect for their dignity as human beings. I'm referring to the servant of God, Peter Cardinal Porekuu Dery, Emeritus Archbishop of Tamale. He lived for 90 years on this earth from 10th May 1918 to 6th of May 2008. So as we remember him today, we also celebrate the 16th year of his passing to glory. He lived almost all of his life, adult life, as a priest, a bishop of Wa from 1960 to 1970.
If you will recall, towards the end of the second millennium, there was a worldwide outcry for the empowerment of the girl child and women. And in Ghana here, there was a jingle of send the girl child to school, send the girl child to school. I want to say that the servant of God had this vision more than half a century earlier, when he realized the importance of empowering women and girl children. And for that matter, he played a very leading and critical role in the founding of St. Francis of Assisi Girls Senior High School, as we call it now. And I am a beneficiary of that school. I say that the holistic education that I got from that school has served as a solid foundation for all that I have achieved in life. We were taught well. At the end of the O-levels, when I wrote the exams, I qualified for sixth form, and I entered St. Louis Senior High School in Kumasi. Even after leaving St. Francis Senior High School and in Kumasi, the name of the servant of God continued to be an inspiration for me and my other colleagues to study hard who came from St. Francis. I'll tell you how. At St. Louis, during midterms, it was the policy of the school that all the students should vacate the campus. And we were coming all the way from the Upper West region, and 4 days was not enough in the early 70s to go back to Wa and beyond and then come back. In any case, transport was very, very difficult. And even if we had the money, we would not be able to go and come back. The servant of God, then Bishop Peter Sapong of Kumasi, took it upon himself that those of us who came from St. Francis of Assisi Girls Senior High School, he would come for us and send us to his outhouse at his residence. And he made it a point once a day to visit us. If he ever came and found us sleeping, he would tell us that he was going to tell Bishop Dery then that his children were not studying, that we were not serious in school. So anytime he mentioned that, then even if we wanted to sleep, we will all sleep with our books open. As soon as we heard footsteps, then we will get up and start reading. And say, oh, I have a good report for my brother Bishop Dery. On hindsight, I think that the servant of God might have told his brother Bishop Akwasi Sapon then that his children were in St. Louis and that he should take care of us. So that's the 4 days we studied like no man's business. Unfortunately, we qualified, we entered the university. I studied law, and with the discipline that I learned and the diligence that I was inculcated in me at St. Francis, I studied hard, I passed my exams, I got a scholarship from the University of Ghana to go and study for my master's in Harvard. So in brief, this is how I have benefited from the servant of God. Did I ever get the chance to meet him in person? As a little girl, I had yearned to meet him in person when he was first ordained Bishop of the Denwa Diocese, but I never got the chance. But decades later, he himself called me to him. I'll tell you how. As a little girl in the elementary school staying at Nadoli, which was then under the Dafiama parish, anytime the bishop was coming to say mass at Dafiama, me and a group of my colleagues would walk on foot 9 miles to go to Dafiama to attend the mass, simply because the bishop was coming. And anytime he entered the church and he was holding his bishop's staff, I felt the presence of God, and I said, this man was the true servant of God. And then I wrote the common entrance, and I chose St. Francis Girls Senior High School because I learned that he was the founder of that school. So it was my idea that choosing that school, I will get the chance to meet him because I expected him to come there from time to time. When I went there throughout the 5 years, he would come on official occasions, but obviously we didn't get the chance to meet him one-on-one. But I had a great hope because for every Form 5 batch of students, after writing the exams, before you leave the school, he would come to the school and hold one-on-one exit interviews with all of us. So I knew that one day my time will come. Unfortunately, to my chagrin, when it was our time in 1972, the servant of God did not come to grant us the exit interview, and I was so disappointed. But going forward, after more than 2 decades, I met the servant of God on a flight, and I went to greet him. So he asked me how I was doing, and I told him a few things. And then when I was going, he happened to have been going for a medical review, and he was accompanied by a medical doctor whom I knew in school. But this medical doctor did not recognize me. So as I was going, the medical doctor asked the servant of God, where do you know this woman? So he called me back by name. And he asked him, I said, you don't know Angelina Mona, now Mrs. Domachare, who went to St. Francis, she went to St. Louis, she went to Legon, she went to Harvard, now she's working as so and so, and she's even now deputy. In fact, he narrated all this. I've never met him one-on-one. So the doctor just bowed down. He said, I said, oh, Angelina, forgive me because we have been with. And this is how and then the final thing that really brought peace when he became cardinal and he came home from Rome. I
would say that as Christians, the call to holiness has everything to do with lifestyle. A lifestyle that is lived basically within the context of the Beatitudes and mindful of the criteria of the final judgments. As Jesus taught us in Matthew 25, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, you do to me. Such lifestyle must directly translate into love of God and love of neighbor. This is what the servant of God believed in. He was a man of prayer whose faith in God was very deep. He served God with all his heart. His faith in God and holiness drove his spectacular charity works. He led a selfless life. His focus was on serving others, irrespective of their origins. From the north to south, east to west, he touched lives. He was motivated by his ability to make space for people, especially the needy, the marginalized, the vulnerable, and many others. Freeing the human person from all forms of dependency through the lens of Christian faith meant so much to him. He laid emphasis on human values as key to human freedom. Human values such as love, forgiveness, respectfulness, empathy, unity, freedom, and humility. Concerning his spirituality, I would say, permit me to share one experience that I had with him. I started encountering the servant of God from 1980, when I became the National Secretary of IMCX Pax Romana. So for 28 years, the servant of God was my spiritual father. Throughout these years, I came to believe that the servant of God was driven by the personal conviction that he was guided by divine providence, and therefore he could know the will of God more by intuition than thinking. I dare say that he could easily predict outcomes without knowing how he came by them. And let me just give one testimony. In 1995, November, and please listen to this very well. My nuclear family of 6 was in Tamale over a weekend for the renewal of marriage vows, 10 years into marriage. Servant of God had been taken ill and was recuperating at St. Victor's Major Seminary. He had earlier agreed on our visit and did not want to disappoint us. So he asked us to join him at the seminary. The celebration went well as planned. The moment of departure came, and as is expected, the servant of God prayed with us and we received the parting blessing. Soon after taking off in our Hyundai Excel saloon car, just about 20 meters away, he beckoned us to reverse. He walked to meet us halfway, and standing by the car, he then slowly remarked, "John, your tires." I knew very well that my vehicle tires were pretty new. He entered his room while we waited in the car and came back with a bottle of holy water. He went around the car, sprinkling the holy water, prayed again, and asked us to leave. He kept waving and gazing at us till we could see him no more. We had an accident as we approached Nkinkesu on the way to Kumasi. It was raining heavily, and while we were negotiating a slopy curve, we suddenly bumped into a pothole big enough to contain the entire vehicle. The entire pothole in that curve had been covered by running water, that it was difficult to identify it. All the 4 tires of our car burst, and steering was difficult to control. The vehicle veered into the other lane, which had a deep valley by its side, and we knew we were going to land in that valley when a minibus full of passengers suddenly appeared from the opposite direction. Indeed, it was my prayer that we collide with the bus rather than land in the valley. It happened, but instead of a head-on collision, our car glided on the side of the minibus and we got deflected back into the right lane till our car stopped on its own. For about 3 minutes, the entire family kept cool inside the car without talking. It was as if we were all silently thanking God for what had happened. Meanwhile, the enraged passengers from the minibus rushed to our car, ostensibly to ask why I drove so carelessly. And when they saw that it was an entire family in the car, they rather began to thank God for saving our lives. The driver of the minibus told us that he had the option to move to the opposite lane when he saw us coming towards him. But according to him, he heard a thin voice telling him to continue in his lane. He then asked us what church we attend. And when we responded that we belong to the Catholic Church, he remarked, "Your God has saved you." I should tell you something. He had been sent to block us from running into the deep valley. 2 days later, my wife called the servant of God with the intention to thank him for the weekend. He intentionally did not want to mention the accident as she thought the old man was recuperating, but this was not to be. The servant of God, in his response, told my wife that we had a terrible accident on the way. And my wife silently thought someone has informed him about it. But this was what he told my wife. "I know, I saw it. That is why I had to call you back when you took off." What can we say about this encounter? This is what makes me think that the servant of God was driven by that personal conviction that he was guided by divine providence. He could know the will of God by intuition. He had deep faith in God, and his spirituality touched lives. This I find very amazing, and I have been touched by his life, drawing so much inspiration from him. There are outcomes that I did not have the opportunity to share with the beatification team, but I strongly believe God will see the servant of God successfully sailing through the beatification process. He touched many lives. A number of those who encountered the servant of God have grown into productive individuals and are successful.
Brother Tando.
So many have been made leaders in various spheres of life with inspirations from the servant of God, and we bless him and ask him to intercede for us in all our endeavors. Eddie?
Yeah, you'll have some more opportunities. So,
Thank you.
right. Okay, thank you very much. Father Betty, you are back.
I'm back, yes. Thank God.
So can we start with you again? Fill us in on the biography of the old man to help us know him better.
So good evening to your viewers. It is a pleasure to be able to share something briefly about the biography of the servant of God, Peter Cardinal Dery. There's so much that can be said, but I will try to be as brief as there is not too much time. Peter Cardinal Dery was born on May 10, 1918 in a small village, Zimopare, in the Nandom traditional area in the Upper West region. His parents, Theodore Porekuu and Agnes Zore, these were peasant farmers. So the young Dery grew up knowing how to take care of the animals and knowing how to assist his parents on the farm. So he was a little rural boy who grew up in an environment where school going was not something that was contemplated at the time. There was no school at the time, so his life was lived within the context of the rural village. So, but he was particularly close to his uncle, who was called Mankuruna, and he lived his life close to this man who was a fetish priest. And this man was well renowned in the then northwestern part of the Gold Coast and into Upper Volta at the time. And Dery assisted him to make the sacrifices that people came to have or to request the man to offer for them. But his life totally changed when his father encountered the missionaries in Jirapa. The missionaries had come to Jirapa in 1929, and his father had gotten in contact with them, and he was excited about joining the missionaries. So there was a family dispute between him and his uncle and his brother, Makruna, but eventually grace prevailed, and Dery was taken by his father to Jirapa to the missionaries. So when he was in Jirapa, he was enrolled together with his father into the catechumenate to be prepared for baptism. And he showed very great brilliance in learning the catechism, so much so that the fathers liked him quite a lot. So in 1932, the very first people in the whole of this area to be baptized were 12, and he was one of the 12. He was a young boy, the others were adults, so he joined that group and he was baptized. And soon after his baptism, because of his brilliance, the fathers took a liking to him and eventually had him as their house boy. So he was a house boy to the father, serving them as they needed his assistance. And they sent him to the catechism school to train. First of all, his father had intended that he should be a catechist. But at that time, there was no school in the whole of this area. So the catechism school was a kind of a back door to formal education. So young Dery was enrolled in the catechism school, and because of his exceptional brilliance, he was sent by the missionaries to Navrongo to begin his elementary education. So he did his elementary, secondary, and training college education in Navrongo, graduating in 1941 as a trained teacher. It was soon after he became a teacher that he felt called to the priesthood. So he made that known to the fathers, and eventually he was enrolled in the St. Teresa's Major Seminary in Amisano near Cape Coast. Because at that time, there was only one major seminary in the whole of the Gold Coast, and it was in Amisano, St. Teresa's Major Seminary. So Dery was sent to Amisano to begin his priestly formation, philosophy and theology. It was in 1946 that the bishops of the then Northern Territories decided to open their own major seminary up in the north. So Dery, together with 6 others from the north, were asked to come back to Wiaga, where they intended to open the major seminary. And it was in Wiaga in 1946 that he was among the first batch to open the St. Victor's Major Seminary, which later on was moved to Tamale, where it is now. So he continued with the seminary formation in Wiaga and successfully completed in February 1951. He was ordained a priest by Bishop Gerard Bertrand in Nandom in 1951 as priest. He was the first priest of this whole area. After that, he served in 3 parishes, Nandom, Ko, and Kaleo. In Kaleo, he was the very first African parish priest ever to serve in that parish, and in fact, in the whole area. Soon after that, he was sent for studies in social studies in Nova Scotia, Canada, to the St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish in Canada. And that is where he did his studies in social sciences. And I think that prepared him in a special way for all the services that he rendered society through his advancements and promotion of the human person through social works. After his studies in Canada, he was asked to go to Lumen Vitae Institute in Brussels, in Belgium, to do religious education, which he did. And the intention was that he would come home and eventually take charge of the religious education programs in the Diocese of Tamale at the time. But as soon as he finished, Wa Diocese was created in 1959, and he was elected the very first bishop of Wa. Pope John the 23rd invited him to Rome, where he was ordained. So he was ordained in Rome by Pope John the 23rd, and this was on May 8, 1960. And when he was ordained, shortly after he returned to the diocese, he made requests to the Pope to allow him to introduce the xylophone and local instruments into the liturgy, and at the same time to compose songs in the local language so that the people could pray using their own language. And this was long before the Second Vatican Council, when enculturation was not even contemplated. So he already started enculturation in the Diocese of Wa by introducing local instruments and local music into the liturgy. And he himself composed quite a number of songs and the order of the Mass, which currently we still use in the liturgy. After 15 years of fruitful pastoral ministry in to Tamale, this was in 1975, and he was made the Bishop of Tamale. Later on, he was elevated as the very first Archbishop of Tamale. This was on May 30th, 1977. And he served the Archdiocese of Tamale until he retired. And as luck would have it, his ministry and his life was well recognized by the Roman authorities. Hence, at the age of 88, in 2006, Pope Benedict XVI, though he was retired, elevated him to the rank of cardinal.
As the bishop in charge of the youth, the servant of God understood us. He always pleaded with his fellow bishops on our behalf to allow us to grow. They just did not understand us. They thought we were too radical. Yes, there were times we went overboard. One instance is when CAGA, which is a Catholic Graduates for Action, that was the Kumasi branch of ICNICA, that's the graduates group of International Movement of Catholic Students. We were Catholic professionals. Joined a group that was not Catholic, that was more socialist oriented, to sign a communique. And at that time, the Rawlings administration was contemplating going to the IMF, and the Catholic bishops had encouraged them to go ahead, and we and the socialists felt that they could manage with more work and hard work. We could manage, and it was a communique. So we had openly come out to disagree with our bishops, and we were seen as opposing the bishops. Cardinal advised us, a man of God advised us that there were times you had to use diplomacy. In our youthful and exuberance, we just went ahead and did what we felt we should do. But after talking to us, and he had a way of talking to us for us to understand that, yes, we could have done it another way. And it's like the situation in which we find ourselves now. We tried not to go to the IMF, but we are there. The second example I'll give is at our 1981 Easter study session, after our deliberations and on our displeasure at the level at which Kalabule had risen in the nation, we IMCS, International Movement of Catholic Students, all agreed that we'll go on a nationwide protest march to express our displeasure at the way things were going. So I belong to the Cape Coast branch. So eventually they sort of tried to prevent us from going on the demonstration, but we had to come to a compromise. Eventually, a couple of us went to the regional minister's office. At that time, it was the late Cancam da Costa, and presented our resolution to him. So yes, as youth, sometimes we overreact, but he being on our side and explaining things to us and advising us. And on hindsight, as at my age now, there are certain things I would have done differently.